Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Ben Wortham with Catholic Charities USA. I'm also joined by Lorraine Bell from Catholic Charities USA. This is part 2 of a 4-part series we're doing in collaboration with Catholics for Family Peace. And I'm gonna go over just a couple housekeeping slides before we get started. So this webinar is being recorded. The webinar will be available in the CCUSA members portal on the website in a couple days following this webinar. For anybody who signed up for this webinar, whether you attended or not, you will be receiving an email with the YouTube recording and PDF version of the slides. All phone lines and computer speakers are going to be muted throughout. And to make things super simple, we're not going to be unmuting anyone today to go live, but please, as you have questions throughout the webinar, use the question and answer or the question box that you have on the right side and submit those, and Lorraine will read your questions out at the end of the webinar. So before we get started too, I wanted to go over, I know a lot of you listening and on the webinar today are going after the continuing education credit. So this webinar does offer 1 continuing education credit to licensed counselors and social workers. So in the following email, for those of you who attended and stayed the 60 minutes, there's going to be a YouTube link, PDF slides, and a SurveyMonkey link. All you have to do when you get this email in the next couple days is click into the SurveyMonkey link and then fill out the quick evaluation and 10-question post-test. And then you have 1 week to do the post-test from the day you receive the email. And within 10 days from today, you'll be receiving your CE certificate. And then I wanted to throw one more thing out is our system, if you're going after the continuing education credit and you dialed in through your phone, through the phone number, we're not going to be able to track that in the GoToWebinar system, so we can't offer CEs to those who called in by phone. So we really apologize about that. And I'll go over this slide one more time quickly at the end too for those going after the CE. And so, like we're saying, this is a collaboration between Catholic Charities USA and Catholics for Family Peace. The series is titled Best Practices to Support Families Impacted by Intimate Partner Violence. And this is the second of 4, and the next 2 coming up also offer a CE. And then before I hand it over to the director of Catholics for Family Peace, Sharon, I wanted to quickly just bring your attention to the chat box. And in the chat box that you have right on the right side, there is a SurveyMonkey link. And we're trying to get a snapshot of all of your agencies who are providing domestic violence services. So if you have, I think about 2 minutes, please click into that and fill it out. We'd be greatly appreciative. So I'm going to hand it over to Sharon, and thank you very much.
And thanks, Ben, and welcome everyone. We are thrilled that you're with us today. We are enjoying this collaborative relationship with Catholic Charities USA, and we are especially interested in the survey results. So please do take a couple minutes to complete it. We want to know what's happening in Catholic land, who's doing what. And based on these webinars, we've already gotten some people contacting us, and we really appreciate that. Both Ben and I will be providing our emails on the very last slide at the end, but it's obviously Ben's is Catholic Charities USA, and we are Catholics for Family Peace. We capitalize the F because it's all about being positive and being for something. And indeed, action is based on prayer, isn't it? So I'm going to lead us in a short prayer and then introduce our 2 esteemed colleagues. We have a very high attendance rate, registration rate today, and we attribute it to the fact that we have a great topic and good presenters. But the prayer, I'm going to borrow, the prayer is initiated by a colleague who called in, Jenny Dubé. She is the founder of Create Space Soul, which is a Catholic woman's guide to dealing with abuse. And she was making the point that people who abuse are a bit like St. Paul was, right? Before he became St. Paul, he was very good at abusing a lot of people. So this prayer is to the Holy Spirit, St. Paul, and St. Joseph. So Holy Spirit, please guide us today in our interactions with each other and with our family and friends, because people learn from each other all the time. And of course, in our work. But please guide us to realize that there is hope for everyone. And just like Saul, just like St. Paul, when he was Saul, hurt a lot of people. He was indeed able to change his behavior and essentially become like St. Joseph. And this is the year of St. Joseph. So let us all find ways in our own lives and the lives of the people we touch. So Holy Spirit, please grant us that. And our group prays every day at 3 o'clock for everyone dealing with abuse. And so we will particularly keep that in mind. So today's program is indeed what helps people who use abuse to change their behavior. And they can indeed change their behavior regardless of what you've heard. So, and Carlos is going to close us out with a success story in that regard. But we have our two presenters. Christoria Wellman is a therapist, an academic, and an educator. She has a great online education module, and is the founder of Pax in Familia. We're doing short bios because we want to drive you to their website. So it's paxinfamilia.org, which you'll see that in the slideshow. But Christoria has worked with a number of Catholic dioceses internationally. And Carlos, who is also a therapist and educator, he gets to stay in Chicago, and it's an international community right there because he works with a large Latino community, and as you know, every culture is unique. So we have two experienced presenters with decades of knowledge and expertise around this very issue of how do you help people change their behavior. So Christoria, please. Carry on.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Ben. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to this presentation with Carlos. I hope you're hearing me. Can you raise your hand, Sharon, if you hear me? Okay.
You're good.
I think you are. So I'm going to discuss what helps people who use abuse to change their behavior. And this is, it's a big question. There's some people who believe people never change. And certainly you would never be in the field of psychology or therapy or social worker if you believe that people never change, because of course they do and they can change. Of course, not everybody changes, but we're going to try to focus on the best case scenario for those who do change. So let's hope this works. Okay, this is not going to the next slide, so I'm going to need you to help me. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to start with a couple of quotations, and there's a progression of clarity when it comes to speaking about domestic violence in the Catholic Church. The first is a quotation from On the Dignity of Women, which came out in 1988. And St. John Paul II has this to say: whenever a man is responsible for offending a woman's personal dignity and vocation, he acts contrary to his own personal dignity and his own vocation. And so that could be applied to many different things, but I think we can also safely apply it to the issue of violence in the family, to the issue of spousal abuse, and also in Catholic families. And let me see if I can go to the next slide. If I can't, then John will pick up. Okay, we need to go back one. I probably did this. Okay, how do I go back? Here it is. There it is. Okay, I do have control now. All right. So in Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation that came out in 2016, so this is the 5th anniversary of that document, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love. He makes this comment in number 54, which I think is probably as clear as it could possibly be. And he says, unacceptable customs still need to be eliminated. I think particularly of the shameful ill treatment to which women are sometimes subjected. Domestic violence and various forms of enslavement, which rather than a show of masculine power are craven acts of cowardice. The verbal, physical, and sexual violence that women endure in some marriages contradicts the very nature of the conjugal union. So for those of us working in the field, when this document came out, and even before that, beginning in 2013, 2014, our Holy Father began to speak very clearly and very specifically about domestic violence. And so now I have a whole new trove of quotations that I can use that I didn't have before. So of course, we're very happy about that. So let's take a look. Why should we treat the person who abuses? So the people think it's a waste of time. There are people who think it's not even worth funding. And I think those of us who work in this field know that that is really not true for a large majority of people who come into treatment. So our first object is to protect the family. So to protect the rights, the safety, the well-being of the abused, so of the survivor, and the children in the family. So we're not just treating the person who's abused. In a sense, we're indirectly treating the whole family by helping them to change the behavior. We're also interested in rehabilitating and healing the abuser. And that happens by the grace of God. That happens in a good therapy session. It happens with the support and love of their fellow attendees. So if you have a good group, you have a cohesive group that feels like a family to them. And that might be the first time they've ever felt comfortable talking about their inner life with other men. To prevent the intergenerational cycle of violence. You see, that's one of the strongest risk factors for ongoing violence in the family, is to have been exposed to it or to have been a victim of it as a child. And so we really want to be able to help them to break that cycle. If they can do that, then we're not going to have that continuous, that repetition that we see so often in these issues. And that's all over the world, the same risk factor. The person with the problem is the one who needs to change if there's going to be real change in the family. I sometimes use the image of going to the doctor and getting an injection. If I go to the doctor with my spouse who's, I don't know, beating me, and there's an injection for that, I'm assuming the doctor's not going to give me the injection. He's going to give it to the person who has the problem. And so I think it's important for us to include in our gaze, to include in our understanding of this issue, the importance of working with the person who's abusing, because that's the person who, theoretically at least, has the power. And that person, if he changes, and I could also say she, but right now, for ease of, for the time we have, I'm going to just say he. If that person changes, the whole family changes. And if that person doesn't change, it's really difficult to change the situation. Treatment of the abuser. It's always important to remember that we have to look on both sides. The recognition, we need to have the recognition that many abusers have been victims of abuse themselves, more than half. So it's a very common phenomenon when you're talking in a group and we get to the topic of childhood experiences. It's very common to hear them say, I was an abused child, even though they may not use those words. And sometimes the abuse is incredible, very, very severe. And so even though I am never going to excuse their present behavior, I need to learn how to recognize and empathize with their past and help them to develop a coherent narrative of what happened to them and how that is most likely affecting their current behavior. If we don't empathize with them, if we're just going to judge them because they were violent now, then we lose the opportunity to make that profound difference of healing in their lives, which will then spill over to the lives of their families. So I think it's so important to learn how to balance that. I'm never going to say, oh yeah, I understand why you did that. I would have done it too. And you're excused because of your past. That's really not the issue at all. We just have to be able to listen and understand that it is an issue. It's something we want to take into consideration and listen with compassion as we would to any other human being. The treatment of the abuser, retraining is inadequate as a means to change abusers, and not just changing the way they think. I've seen many patients or clients over the years who they figure out pretty quickly what it is the court wants to hear, and they figure out pretty quickly what it is that you want to hear as their therapist. And they'd be very happy to just repeat that back to you in the sense of retraining, like I learned how to read the times table. It's not about that. It's about healing and recovery, like any other victim, any other survivor, before they can stop using the coping patterns, including violence, which are affected by their own victimization. So I'm going to make sure that we go below the surface. It's not enough to just have them repeating things that sound good to the judge, like Yeah, I learned that I have to respect my wife. Yes, I believe my wife is equal to me, because that might not have seeped down into his heart at all. So as I said, it's important to work for healing. We always want to come from a lens of respect and compassion. If I'm going to interact with somebody who is facing the consequences, and usually that consequence would be they go to jail, they get arrested, they're being mandated to therapy. And in California, that's a 1-year therapy experience. It's 52 weeks, 2 hours every week, and they're being mandated. They're not going there voluntarily. So when we're interacting with them, we have to be able to figure out how to help them to face the consequences and also to become motivated to change their life's path. And this is not something that automatically happens. When Carlos is speaking, he's going to tell us about the Wonderful Resurrection Project in Chicago, which is a voluntary program. So people come in, and he's going to tell us more about it, but it's different because they're not court ordered. When somebody's court ordered, you're going to get a lot of resistance at the beginning. Naturally, they didn't want to be there and they didn't think they needed to be there. So I need to put on my lenses of respect and compassion and keep them on the whole time. I often say to my trainees, if you wanted to be in law enforcement, you would have gone into that field. We're therapists. We're here to help somebody to heal. And I cannot do that unless I treat them with respect and I listen to them with compassion. I don't make excuses for their behavior, but I listen. So, bringing up the topic of empathy, your client will learn empathy and caring if you model it to him or to her personally. So, the first person who's going to teach them empathy is you. You as the therapist, you as the group leader. And I think that in many, many cases, the reason that our clients don't have empathy is that they have never received it themselves. If they come from a violent family, if they come from a family where there's insecure attachment, where they can't rely on other people, or those people are perhaps abusing them and often abusing them. So you have people who have not experienced empathy themselves. And so I want to make sure they have an experience of empathy. I also want to make sure the group that I'm leading is reliably respectful to all. I consider that my most important task is to monitor the tone of the conversation, to always make sure, number one rule, respect each other. Don't put anybody down, don't laugh at people, so that people will feel safe. And that's a really essential characteristic, maybe number one. If you teach empathy skills and rehearse them in the group and as homework, so they need to learn this stuff, they don't know it. I mean, they really, it's like I don't speak Swahili, although I'd like to learn. So, I need someone to teach me that. And so it's the same with empathy. They need to learn the skills that we probably picked up from our parents without even thinking about it, by living in a family that had a certain level of loving and of empathy. And sometimes it's hard for us to understand without listening to their stories just how much that was lacking in their life. And so it's really not surprising that many of these clients do not know how to show empathy. It's kind of not one of their skills. You need to give him or her a reason to change his behavior. And so if you can motivate him to understand the importance of change and really help him to find those steps and to move forward in those steps and to practice it, then that's going to help him. He has to be motivated, and we'll talk about that more later. If he or she is willing to learn to be empathic and caring. And then there's the second part, which is if he or she is able to learn to be empathic and caring. And here I'm speaking of some of our clients who might have a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, people who are very low in empathy. And obviously I don't work in the prison system anymore, but there are clients who don't respond to therapy. And we have to accept the fact that this is not a 100% operation. You're not going to get 100% success. There are going to be people who give the appearance, and it may be true, that they are not able to learn to be empathic. And that may be a question of motivation, they don't want to learn, or it's not happening for them neurologically. And so, obviously we can't get into this. This would be an 18-hour course if we were doing the whole thing. So we just keep moving forward. I really want to speak about one of the main things that I have found helpful in working with a group of people who can be very difficult. Right? This is not an easy task. It's called pacing and leading. It's a technique that was developed by Milton Erickson, who's a very well-known psychiatrist, and he practiced clinical hypnosis, even though this is not hypnosis. So pacing and leading is, I get on the same path with the client. So I'm going to walk on the path with the client. We're going to pace together, right? And this is what our Holy Father calls accompaniment. He mentions it every few sentences. He talks about it all the time. And this is really, it's really the same thing. You get on the same path with the client by listening closely to his or her narrative. And while you're doing that, you're showing care and understanding of his or her point of view or experience. So I'm not agreeing with it, but I'm listening to it. I'm trying to understand it from their point of view. Once you have established that connection, which is really based on respect, it's based on the dignity of that human being. I may not agree with what they're saying, but I have enough openness in my heart, and I'm making an intentional decision to listen to that person and try to come closer to him. When you've established that connection through accompaniment, you can then mention the lead, which is where you perceive that he or she needs to go based on your program and based on your method. So, you have a goal in mind. And my goal might be over here, but right now my client is here. He's not going to get over here in 2 seconds. It's going to take a little bit of time, or even a lot of time, and there's a process. And so we get into that process using this technique, which is actually very effective. Let's see where I am. Okay, preferred therapist behaviors. I found this in my doctoral dissertation, and it goes into greater detail in my book, which I'll mention to you later. So when I was interviewed, because I did qualitative research, and while I was interviewing these men, they were all Mexican men, I kind of wanted to know what they preferred in their therapist. What kind of therapist was useful to them? And all of these men had come from other therapy groups. And there were some of them who had changed therapists several times in the same year. It just happened. They had one therapist for 2 months, and then there was a change, and there was someone else, which, by the way, not a good idea. And the clinical style that they identified as helpful, as somebody whom they wanted to speak to, was a therapist who was self-confident, who was friendly. In Spanish, they call that simpático or simpática, who had a personal touch, right? Who wasn't holding back or just really clinical, cold. That didn't work very well for them. A person who was very patient, because you better be patient if you're doing this work, and open. So kind of presenting there like an open flower. I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you. The therapeutic skills that they appreciated were self-disclosure. So the therapist being willing to share a little bit of themselves and of their family with the clients. We always bring in photographs, and they're showing pictures of their kids. I mean, it's not like we do that for the whole hour or the whole 2 hours. It's 5 minutes from time to time. But it brings a sense of bonding to the group, and people feel as if they belong. And you talk about your spouse or your children. You don't go into details, you don't tell them anything about your sex life, but you don't mind a little self-disclosure. And I think it's very important. And I think this is actually important, not just with Latino men, but with really all of our clients. It's a very helpful procedure to be able to open up a little bit about yourself, because otherwise they feel like maybe an insect or a specimen that somebody is examining. Learning how to show attention, that's very important. Listening to them, having a sense of humor, even though this topic is not at all funny, but we do have moments of humor in the group, and I mean not being afraid to laugh when something is funny. And of course, we never laugh at anything that has to do with violence, and they already know just by my demeanor that that's a rule. We pace with the client, that's what we just talked about, pacing and leading, and positive reinforcement. It struck me so much when I was doing my dissertation research that one man was talking about his therapist, and she never ever said a good word to anybody in the group, and she never ever congratulated them when they made a little bit of progress. I had one man in my research study who said, when this therapist left and the new one came in, it was like losing your mother and getting a stepmother. It was like losing your sister and getting a stepsister. And I thought, I can't think of a better description for somebody who comes in with a cold attitude, never self-discloses, they don't know anything about her, very judgmental, very, kind of anti-machismo, that whole thing. It was a very negative experience for them. And if you're court ordered, you don't have a choice, right? You have to be there. And so it's really unfair. Okay, let's move forward. Okay, where are we now? Here it is. Ineffective techniques. So here's an example. This is one of the men from my study. She would criticize us a lot. We debated machismo a lot. I think she could have used a better strategy to make us think and debate instead of the way she did it. Because the way it is, the men just see her as a feminist. And it shouldn't be like that. It's better if we can focus on that we are equal. So I learned a great deal from the men in my study. I learned what not to do. Am I a feminist? I consider myself a feminist. Of course, why would I be working in this field if I didn't care about women and if I didn't want women to have a much better life? But my definition of feminist is very far from his definition of feminist. And so I understood from that that it was so important to focus on equality and not get into these highly politicized terms which mean different things in different places and to different people. So that, of course, could be a whole seminar just in itself. Approaches to working with Latino men who abuse. And I share this with you not because I believe it applies to more than just Latino men. And of course, we'd have to have more research to be able to say that with confidence. The effective teaching style that I learned from my participants was clarity and structure. So your teaching needs to be clear. You need to define things. You need to make sure everybody understands the word you're using. I had one guy in my study who was in treatment for 11 months or 12 months, and he didn't know what equality meant. And he said it seemed like everybody seemed to understand it, so he didn't want to ask. And so can you imagine coming through a whole year of treatment with one of the core principles of what you're learning and you don't know what it means? So I really learned a lot from that. So the importance of clarity and defining things and having a structure that everybody can follow. We have different educational levels. We have people who are not used to sitting in a classroom of any kind for 2 hours once a week. So we want to make sure that the structure is something that they can follow and that it doesn't change all the time. Ineffective teaching style, authoritarian and unfocused. So unfocused would be where you don't have clarity and structure. Authoritarian would be where you're basically scolding the guys. You're basically trying to impose on them the gender roles that you believe are what they need to believe. And so you're coming at it in an authoritarian way. And this, of course, you think about it, you speak to someone who has a high level of masculine gender identity and you come against their beliefs, what can you expect in return? So we have this defensiveness building up in the group. It's very uncomfortable. I've seen it happen. An authoritarian style is not effective. It just doesn't work. An effective therapeutic style is to be friendly and empathic. You don't want to be a pushover. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to what's really happening. An ineffective therapeutic style is to be confrontational and blaming. And so even though I might want to do that, if I want my therapy to be effective, I don't do it. And there's a lot of research coming out of, especially the work of Christopher Murphy. He's done a lot of research on confrontational therapy and also on motivational interviewing. And I think that there's one of those articles in the list that I sent you. I found in my research that they didn't really mind who was giving the therapy, as long as that person could speak their language, understood their culture, and had these other characteristics that were very important for them. Moving forward. Okay, am I where I'm supposed to be? No, I'm not. Okay, does the treatment work? I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. Programs differ in content and process. So that means that every program doesn't work the same way. Therapists differ in level of effectiveness and approachability. So I could be giving the same normally effective program, but have a different therapist who is not doing a good job for whatever reason, maybe some of the things I just mentioned. That therapist is not going to have the same effect as somebody else. Clients differ in motivation, flexibility, and desire to heal. So I'm not going to get the same results, even though I might have the best possible training, tons of experience, and there's 12 different men in my therapy group. They're not all going to respond the same way. We know this. In my judgment and experience, and I think Carlos will also bear this out, this therapy, with group therapy with men who abuse, works very well with most clients. If you really take the time and you really help them with the skills and you develop the atmosphere that you need to have and you stay with them, you pace, you lead. It works with most of the men. You follow up, but it doesn't work with everybody. So research is ongoing, but as I think I mentioned before, it is not well funded. It's not one of the areas that gets a lot of funding. And doing this kind of long-term research study is a very expensive proposition, so it just doesn't get done. Those who abuse are not all the same. I really want to touch on this. I think it's really important. Understanding the typology of abusers will help you, if you're taking on this work, to adjust your expectations, to increase your success rate in therapeutic work. But this population is very difficult to work with, and some a lot more difficult than others. But it's always difficult. And so when you're doing this, if you expect everybody to get on board with what you're talking about, if you expect everyone to make rapid progress or even any progress, that's not going to happen, especially in a court-ordered setting. It may be very different when people are there in a voluntary setting. Treatment efficacy differs depending on the personality, the cognitive structure, and the life experiences of those who abuse, as well as on the therapist and the tone of the group. So there's a lot of different factors. I'm just going to touch on this. This would be like a whole seminar. Touching on typologies. So the first type is generally violent, antisocial personality. So this person has a history of violence. There's probably a big component of substance abuse. They tend to have very rigid gender roles. They're violent outside the home as well as in it. They might even meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. They may have a history of criminality. That person is probably not going to respond very well to any therapy, which is one of the problems we have. Now, as we said in the beginning, we don't want to give up on anybody. We want to give them a chance. Sometimes it's very difficult to have them in your group. They will hold everybody back. They hold everybody's progress back because they want to be the center of attention, and they really want to show you that you're no good because they don't like women. So it's a problem, and I leave that to you. We can talk about it some other time. The next three levels, the next three typologies are family only, someone who you would be surprised if you knew this was happening. It's not something you would expect. Or a low level of antisocial. So someone who doesn't meet the full criteria, has some antisocial behaviors, has some history, but is not as rigid, not as difficult to treat. And then our last category is dysphoric borderline personality. And typically the people who every year in San Diego, at least, we have at least 1 or 2 murder-suicides, or, in some countries they would say femicide-suicide. So the woman leaves the abuser, she gets another boyfriend, he goes over and he kills her. Sometimes he kills the boyfriend and then he kills himself. And this happens every year, unfortunately. This person would be very likely that they have a dysphoric borderline personality. So the terror of being abandoned by the person that they believe that they love is so great that they can't tolerate it. So when you have this kind of personality in your group, they probably need individual therapy as well as being in the group. So, you're going to do something at the same time, and they possibly need medication as well, but they can make some good progress. Our treatment goals, I'm just going to skim through this quickly. Eradicate violent, abusive, coercive, and intimidating behavior towards the partner. So that's number 1, right? Stop the violence. Learn to take responsibility for your own behavior. That, of course, is very difficult, and it gets better. It gets better with time and with the help of the group. We as therapists model and create empathy in the client. So we show that to them, we practice it with them. They get to understand that this might be something that I could learn. And I have seen this happen, that this is not just words. Teach anger management. So things I didn't learn at home, I'm going to learn now. Increase self-esteem through the mastery of skills. So people start feeling good about themselves when they realize that they're not out of control anymore, that they can stop this behavior that fills them with shame, unless, of course, they have antisocial personality disorder. So we increase their self-esteem through helping them to master these skills, and through being in a group of people who show support and love. It's very important. Replace maladaptive conflict resolution skills, such as violence, substance abuse, with constructive nonviolent skills. So if I'm going to take something away, I have to put something in its place. And what I'm putting in its place is a toolbox of different strategies that somebody can use when they find themselves in a state where they would normally become violent or verbally abusive. And now they have 10 different choices that they can do instead of that. So that's really important. Learn a new way of being a man. I heard this in my interviews for my doctoral work. Was this man I interviewed, and he said, I like that my therapist taught me a different way to be a man. It's not like I stopped being a man. I didn't become a woman in my therapy. I'm still a man, but I'm learning a different way to be a man. And he really appreciated that. He appreciated that he could still be a man and still have a positive masculine identity. Nobody was putting on an apron and sending him into the kitchen, which is a big fear for a lot of people, right? They're scared of that. So he was very grateful that he was able to modify his gender roles to a place where he began to enjoy having a wife and having a family. And he was still with his wife, which is about half of my clients are still with their wife, are still with their partner. And then about half of them are in the middle of getting divorced. But they might have another relationship coming up where they can practice all these great skills that they learned. Address substance abuse effectively. If you don't do that, everything falls apart. Prevent the intergenerational cycle of violence that we already talked about. Lessons from the field. You want to make sure that the person is not drinking in a problematic way. People who were arrested when they were under the influence of alcohol or drugs are normally sent to like an AA group here in California anyway. And I think that's true in most places. There's some places that have like a dual diagnosis track, but pretty much if the person is drinking while he's in the group, he's not getting benefit from it. And if he starts drinking later, he might go back to all his old ways. And this happened in our pilot study, which we did for 4 years. Every single one of the men who relapsed, and I think there were 3 or 4, even though the number was small, they did so under the influence of alcohol. So it's a really, really important risk factor. It's not the reason people become violent, but it makes things worse. Let's keep going. The group is a safe place to heal and change, or it should be, in my opinion. One of the most important things that you can do is create that safe space for healing. And I'm going to quote one of the men who talked about the importance of personal change that comes in making a contribution to other men. So when he started investing in the group and putting himself into the group, here's one of his quotations. So a new man had come in, and of course, new man didn't want to be there and didn't think he needed to be there. His wife should be there. This is a very common experience. And so he said to him, if you don't talk, we can't help you. That's what we're here for. We're members of the same group. So you hear that unity, right? First he said one word, then he began to tell all his problems, and he began to cry, which is of course against the rules, right? I mean, the rules if you're a guy. Everyone was listening and people got really surprised and quiet. The other guys helped him to know how to solve his problem. And after a while, you could see he was really relieved and he started to laugh with the others. So this is a concrete example of the process of group therapy and how the men help each other. And, you know, in most places, if the guy started to cry, they'd be laughing at him, right? But here in the group, that would never happen. And so it's a safe place to heal. Graduates from the group have the potential to become agents of change themselves. And here's an example of one man. I mean, obviously, these are not their real names. I talk a lot with my brothers and sisters. I'm teaching them how to talk and how to listen to someone. I would encourage them to talk about their problems and then find a way to help them. I really feel like I have a lot of valuable information to share. I'm proud of myself, of what I'm doing. I'm keeping my resolutions and changing my life. So I feel proud of myself as a person. So here's somebody who has like this wealth that he wants to share. And that would be, I think, an important thing for us to do, especially if we're working with a voluntary population, to help them to channel some of that wonderful wealth that they have acquired in the course of their therapy. I'm going to skip this one just because of time, and later on you'll have it so you can do it. Just to summarize some of the results of my dissertation, the self-reported treatment outcomes for Latino men who abuse. So here's some of the things that they mentioned that were most important to them. And over time, I came to realize that the most important thing for them was that they learned to be nurturing fathers. They were in the process of learning that. They didn't have it themselves. They didn't know how to do it. It's the same thing about empathy, the same thing about skills. They didn't have it, they couldn't give it. And so learning to be nurturing fathers is very important to them. They wanted to break that cycle. improve communication skills with their partner or with their children, as well as with their boss and other people. Ability to manage anger, so not feeling that you're at the mercy of your midbrain. It's like, when your limbic system kicks in, you know what to do. And so this ability gave them a great deal of self-confidence. Greater flexibility in gender roles, understanding and trying on gender equality. So they're just trying it on. It's not like you're forcing them to, change their outfit. They're just trying it on a little bit. I'm going to try this on, see how it feels, see what it looks like, see how my wife responds. And so, fortunately, we do have time. When you have somebody for a year, that gives you quite a bit of time to help them to first understand what gender roles are and whether or not that's working for them. And then to start to try on gender equality, new behaviors, new attitudes. And that does take time, but most of the time I see that we have good results with that. And that's an ongoing process. Overcoming addiction to alcohol, and again, learning to be a different kind of man. So to motivate the men in my group, I would want to ask them, who do I want to be? As myself, as a human being, as a man, as a husband, as a father. And if I'm working in a faith-based organization, as a son of God. So what is my vision of myself? Who do I want to be? Where am I going? Which is something that I learned in my study. Quite a few of the men in my study told me that they'd never really thought of those questions, which the ability to practice self-reflection was not big. And so they needed to learn that, to practice self-reflection, to practice asking these questions that we all have to ask as human beings to be able to find our way. So when we speak about motivation, it helps us to understand the causes of behavior and the motivating factors that are going to move somebody to change their behavior. So intrinsic motivation is internal motivation. And an example of internal motivation in this case would be a person who abuses comes to the realization that he or she has to change and be a better person, a better spouse, a better parent. So that comes from within. That's intrinsic motivation. The second one is extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is external motivation, which is provided by the society, which is provided possibly by the family, by people outside of ourselves. For example, a person who abuses goes to treatment so as not to go to jail. So basically that's my choice. I go to jail or I go to treatment. So against my will, unwillingly, perhaps dragging my feet, perhaps in a very bad mood, very angry, I go to therapy. So I'm there, but I'm not there because I want to be there. Or I seek help so that I'll be able to stay with my partner, or so that I'll be able to have contact with my children. So there's extrinsic motivation. There's an external force that is causing me to move. And so clearly it's preferable for someone to have intrinsic motivation, but we go with what we've got. So that's part of pacing and leading. The stages of change, I'd like to go into this because it's very relevant, but there's no time. So I'm just going to leave it here for you. I'm sure you've probably already seen this. Here's a quotation from Ignacio, who's one of the men I interviewed. In the course of our interview, those were long interviews, 2 hours or more, he started thinking about and talking about his decision to change. Maybe you just realize for yourself and take responsibility and decide to change if you want to change. Because a lot of us think that we're fine, we don't need this, but in reality we do. The need to change, that decision you take yourself. And not because of anyone else. It's the need to be different. You have to decide for yourself. So I love this quotation. I put it in the program in Spanish, of course, so that other guys could read it, right? Because that would move them forward on their process of decision making to hear someone else's voice on the topic. In our study that we did I'm going to have to skip this one because I'm looking at the clock. In our study it's an ongoing group or many groups in the state of Durango in Mexico. So I asked one of the therapists down there what types of incentives or coercion were used to motivate men to attend the treatment groups, because there they don't have mandated court therapy, even though the person may go before the judge, and it will be strongly recommended. So first they were motivated by the ruling imposed by the judge. Later, it was the welcome and the understanding of the therapist and the group. So it wasn't just, I have to be there, I'm looking forward to going there. I want to be in the group. I feel understood there. The therapist understands me. The group gets me. Finally, they were motivated by seeing that they really had changed their interpersonal relationship, especially with their spouse and children. So they began to try some of these techniques. They began to try some of this expansion of their ideas about being a man, about being a husband, being a parent. And as they began to practice some of those things and see the results, that motivated them. So I'm becoming a better person. I want to keep learning because this is actually helping me. And of course, that would then be intrinsic motivation, which is what we're looking for, but we don't start there most of the time. Program content. I'm going to skip over this. I think most of you will be using some sort of program, and they usually have these topics involved in them. They're all important. And for the program that I wrote in Spanish, which is called Sin Golpes, and I'm going to show that with you in just a second, we added the integration of spiritual beliefs and practice to promote lasting change and to prevent future violence. So we wanted them to know what the church is teaching today, in the 21st century. What is the church teaching now about domestic violence that they probably never heard growing up? I see somebody else is coming in. Hello, welcome. So let's take a look. I'm going to skip this one. This is from the first session where we try to motivate people to get on the path of the hero's journey, to start that pilgrimage that will bring them to a better place in their relationships. So therapy groups for men. And this could be involuntary court-ordered, or it could be voluntary, faith-based, where people go to this group, and it's not called, they're like a group for violent men. It's a men's group, so it's open to all, which is a great idea. So if you have a therapy group for men, you need a respectful, well-trained group leader. You need cohesive and supportive group of their peers. So you need to make sure that you're running a group that is respectful, that shows love, that's learning without coercing, and that's learning without you being authoritarian, and you make sure that people are listening. A research-based program designed to focus on the main objectives of IPV treatment, what we just talked about. IPV is intimate partner violence. Then the therapy will do its magic for many, if not all of the members. So everybody's not going to come out of there transformed, but you will see a lot of change. Let's move forward. It looks as if I should be keeping my mouth shut starting right now, right? Sharon, I believe we're done. So I'm just going to point out to you the rest of these slides. I have a vote.
You can do this in 30 seconds. Go right ahead, because we want people to have resources, and you and Carlos are full of resources. So go right ahead.
So here's my book, which basically details my dissertation. It's full of quotations from the men that I interviewed. It's, I think, very interesting. So this is that book. The next one is the cultural treatment model for Latin American partner abusive men, called Sin Golpes, Cómo transformar la respuesta violenta de los hombres en la pareja y la familia. So this is the book that I wrote as a result of my dissertation and the 4-year pilot group, and it's used widely in Mexico, Latin America, and also in the US, especially in California. Okay, moving forward here. Content and process. So if you want this program in English, it's called the Stop Domestic Violence Program by David Wexler. It does not contain a lot of the changes a lot of the adaptations that I made in the Spanish version. So it's a cognitive behavioral approach. It's also a client-centered attachment approach. So it's got both of those. It's not, in my opinion, it's far from enough to just teach them skills. You have to help them to get inside their own heads and do some self-reflection and understand some of what's made them behave the way they are, and help them to heal. Many of the men in our groups, like all of us, have become overwhelmed by emotions they have difficulty handling, and they lack the skills to handle them in a constructive and proactive manner. So rather than treating them like lost criminals, that's just a waste of our time to be doing anything with them, we treat them like human beings who have a life story the same as we do, and help them to be different. And this works, as I said, and Carlos will tell you, most of the time. It's not 100%. Human rights education, really important. talking about difficult topics, this is something you need to be studying because it's, there's a lot of minds. This is a minefield. You really have to learn where to step and where to avoid. Passing the client's test. The clients are going to think you're out to get them. Naturally, they're not there voluntarily. And so it's hard. You have to pass their tests. Respect and equality. Let me just go over this. I think it's so important. You're selling a product they didn't know they wanted or needed. So the product is respect and equality. They didn't know they needed that. And so you need to make it attractive to them. Once they experience the benefits like those men in Durango, they will want more, they will learn more, and they'll practice it more. You open the door for the client, we pave the way for the healing of many families. So it's such a privilege to be able to help one person because that ends up helping the whole family. We added spirituality into the model. They asked for it. I believe that our Catholic and Christian traditions have a great wealth of virtue, a great wealth of spiritual practice that can really help our men. And of course, more than anything else, just knowing that God loves you and being able to get into the rhythm of being loved by God as we are is going to be a huge explosion of grace for them. And so being able to do this in a faith-based community is a real blessing, something that's really great. And I think at this point, I'm just going to show you this book. You can see it. And we're going to look at the 20 sessions that I selected for church-based voluntary programs. This is just for you to look at, so that, because I mean the program itself has 39 sessions, and you may not be able to use all of this. And then we have my website, paxandfamilia.org, where there are free downloads of my book and also my violence prevention catechetical program. And this is my email. And then we have my online program, Violence and Abuse in Catholic and Christian Families, Preparing an Effective and Compassionate Pastoral Response. That came out at the beginning of February. And that's online. And so you can find the address there at the bottom. I will be putting out a course for Catholic men's groups. Like maybe Carlos and I should do it together in 2022, God willing. So I think I'm done. I'd like to thank everybody for listening and hand this baton over to Carlos.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay. So very good presentation, Dr. Whelan. I don't have much to say, but what I'm gonna say is my experience working with men's. Many years ago, I was working in a parish in Chicago City. I was working as a family counselors, but we also had a domestic violence program. And then we started to listen the women that were coming to our domestic violence program saying, Carlos, who told you that I wanted to get divorced, or who told you that I wanted to get separated from my husband, or who told you that I want my husband to be out of the family? What I need you to do is tell me for him to change. I want him to change. I want him to understand that he could be a better father or a better husband. And then we started putting special attention to the men. And then we created this men's program. And then after 17 years, we've been very successful with this program. We have, I don't know if I can change the slides here. Okay, so we have, one of the things that we do with this men's program is that we have, for each person that comes to our men's program, they have the opportunity to come to our individual session program. So besides coming to the group, they have the option. They are not mandated, they are not obligated, but they can come to our individual session program. Sometimes they come because they know that they wanted to talk things that they cannot talk in the group. So we really have a very high, we are not mandated, like Dr. Whelan was saying. The people that come to our program, to our men's program, they are not mandated by court. But I tell you one thing, they are mandated by their family. And for Latinos, family is so important that it's like being mandated. So because they don't want to lose their family, so it is important for them to continue attending. So so they come and attend individual counseling. It's an open group, the group that we have. It's not like a timed group, but it's a group that you can come as many times as you want. They meet once a week. We meet once a week, and they can come anytime. We have people coming. We have men coming for more than a year to our group, because there is not a discharge date that they have to leave. So they can stay in the group as long as they wanted to continue growing. So in this group, one thing that really worked for us in this group is that we have created this informal sponsorship program. That means that they can call each other. We have a set of telephone numbers from the same member of the group, so they can call when if they are going through a crisis. They cannot reach me, that I'm the counselor, or they cannot reach the priest. They can reach each other. So it's not a formal sponsorship program, but it's working for these years for that group. Their group is run in Spanish, so it is important that we know the culture, and we know that family is very important, and people are willing to change because family is so important that they start realizing that they need the change, and then they start making the change, and they can see that they can do it. So one of the things that we believe that this group is working, that a few years ago, like 3-4 years ago, we have an evaluation from a university, and that evaluation said that for some reason it is important for these people, their relationship. You know how in the person-centered theory that said that the relationship with the client is very important. So, we treat these people like family. They are not another client. They are an important person. So they can come here, and they said in the evaluation that they feel that they are in a family, that they feel welcome, that they feel like it's a family-oriented atmosphere. And that's basically that what we do. I know I don't have a lot of time, but a successful story that I wanted to share with you from this group. I had this person that's still coming after a year and a half. He's still coming to the group with no obligation, but he's still coming. He first came because out of this sudden, his wife told him, I wanted to get divorced. So can you imagine how this person that thought that everything was fine, and then his wife wants to get divorced, and then he went, excuse my language, he went crazy. And then he started to abusing her by even physical abuse, stalking her, following her everywhere she went, controlling her cell phone. And it was very difficult until one day his youngest son said to him, Papi, you need to stop because the family can't handle this anymore. And then that was like a wake-up call for him. And then someone told him about our group, and he's here since then. They're not together anymore, but I think one of the things that I think he accomplished, that he realized that he's powerless about that. He cannot make his wife come back to him, but he realized that he can make a lot of change. And then now he's part of the sponsorship program that we have. In the program, he keeps coming to the program, and that's a very good sample of what Dr. William was saying. People believe that people do not change, and I am a therapist for many years, and the reason I keep doing what I do is because I see that people change, and not because I have read it somewhere. It's because I have the experience working with them, and I have the experience working with family that now they are living in a very peace atmosphere. So, if anybody wants more information about our group, we are located in Chicago. In this, I don't know if I can go. Sorry. This is our intake. If you're in Chicago or you have someone that you want to refer to our program, this is our number where you can do an intake, and doors are open to anybody. That's it.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Christoria and Carlos. So, audience, you can see why we asked the two of them to share information on the fact of the matter is people do change. And I put in the chat that Maxine Davis, an assistant professor, did the research on Carlos's program, and Christoria clearly demonstrated that people do change. It's not you know, it's not a message that's heard often enough. But there's every reason to think that people can change, particularly with a spiritual base, right? We're people of hope. And as much as you'd like, so a round of applause for Christoria and Carlos. Thank you so very much. And if you like this, we have 2 more webinars that we do them every other week. The next one is going to be the effects of domestic violence on children. And wasn't Carlos's statement perfect? So it was a child who said, "Dad, you know, give it up. You know, we can't tolerate this anymore." And so that's going to be the one on June 2nd. And then this issue of violence. Christoria talked about how there are murder suicides. Actually, there are 3, on average, there's 3 people a week that die. Maybe it's a day even. Anyway, people die of domestic violence. And so our last session on this series will be on June 16th about assessing one's without risk of dying. And Lorraine, I don't know whether you wanted to grab any questions or we'll respond. Maybe.
Yeah, Sharon, real quick, there's a few questions. I think this is one is for Dr. Wellen. It says, are there known and effective collaborative efforts by the courts to provide counseling for abusers when the sentencing is probation? And this was by a question by Inez Nolan. So that's the question.
It differs from state to state. And certainly in some states, they may not have mandated therapy. I'd be surprised if they didn't have it, because most of the time when the person has committed domestic violence, they're in jail often just for the weekend. They come before the judge and the judge will say, "Here are your choices, stay in jail or you go to this therapy. I'm mandating you to this therapy. You have 30 days to sign up." I'm saying how it works in California. You've got 30 days to sign up. We have a hearing in 30 days. You come back, show me that you've signed up, and do your therapy. And then every month, every 2 months, the therapist has to write a brief report to the judge so that the judge knows this person is in fact continuing their therapy. And if they break the rules or they don't pay or whatever it is, then they have to be terminated from that therapy. So there's very specific rules which actually help you as a therapist to not have to be the bad guy when somebody's not coming in or when they're not paying their fee, which is usually quite low. But I do want to say it differs from state to state because these regulations are mandated by the state. And so the person who asked this question would have to maybe go online to their local probation office and find out what's available. Because most of the time there's going to be, I know that they're using my program in many different states in the US, and they have different lengths of time. There's some states, the last time I looked, it was only 16 weeks of therapy, which is very little. Other places it's 52, so it varies. But I would be very surprised if somebody was on probation and they had not been offered an opportunity to go to therapy or mandated to that therapy in the US anyway.
Well, thank you for that answer. I think the rest of the comments are just accolades saying how this presentation was just wonderful, very informative, really good information, and just a lot of appreciation for this specific topic. So Ben, if you want to.
Yeah. I'll close this out real quick. Thank you all so much. We had a large crowd today. That's great. Hopefully see you in 2 weeks. And so lastly, with the continuing education credit, for those of you going after it, 1 continuing education credit, there's going to be an email sent after in the next couple of days with PDF slides, the YouTube recording, and the SurveyMonkey link. If you want the CE, just click into the SurveyMonkey link, fill out the quick evaluation and 10-question post-test, and within 10 days from right now, you will have your CE certificate. So thank you all again, and we will see you in 2 weeks. And thanks to our presenters. You guys were great.
Thanks for the invitation.
Bye.
And thanks, everyone. Call us anytime. Which I guess is our next slide. If we might.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Let's do that, Sharon, real quick. There you go.
Yeah. So call Ben or me anytime. Be glad to help with you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.